She only wanted sunlight on her face. A walk down the driveway in the chair her daddy built. But when the HOA woman saw her, she marched over with rope in, hand-tied her like an animal, then raised her hand as if that girl had disrespected a law of nature. What she didn't see: the truck pulling in, the father stepping out, and the badge glinting on his chest like a storm coming fast. The light came early on their street, brushing soft gold across the porch as Sophie stirred in her chair. Her father, already up before sunrise, poured 2 mugs of coffee, one with a splash of milk for her, even though she never finished it. He'd carved the porch ramp himself, laid every board with quiet pride. It creaked a little now, but it held, just like he did. She was 16, nearly 17, and though her legs hadn't moved in years, her eyes saw everything. He always said she noticed more sitting still than most folks did running full speed. Every morning, they had the same ritual. He wheeled her outside to catch the early air before the sun got mean. She loved the rustle of leaves, the distant sound of sprinklers hissing to life, and the soft coo of mourning doves nesting in the trees near the sidewalk. Her chair was one of a kind. He built it from scratch after the hospital ones bruised her arms and made her feel like a patient instead of a person. This one was wood and leather, curved just right, with hand-tooled sides that told stories in patterns. A hawk, a mountain, a girl with wild hair and stars in her hands. He didn't say what it meant, but she figured it out. She liked the driveway best, where she could feel the slight pitch of the concrete and glide a little under her own strength. He let her have that freedom, watching from the porch with quiet trust. Sometimes she just sat and painted the same dandelion stalk again and again, trying to catch how it bent in the breeze. The neighborhood was mostly quiet. People waved from across the street, polite and distant, the way suburban folks often are when they don't know what to say. She didn't mind. She had her dad. She had her chair. She had mornings like this, before the world woke up and remembered to be cruel. The only one who never waved was the woman at the end of the cul-de-sac, always in beige, always watching. Her lawn was perfect, her rules posted like scripture. Sophie didn't know her name, but her daddy did, and every time that woman stepped outside, he tensed just a little, like he was waiting for a storm that hadn't come yet. The letter came folded twice, pressed sharp at the corners like it had been handled with care by someone who didn't mean well. It wasn't in an envelope, just slipped between the slats of their porch railing like a message meant to surprise. Her father found it early, before Sophie had woken, and read it with a stillness that didn't match the rising anger in his chest. The words were printed on clean white paper, in a stiff, officious font. It mentioned community compliance, unauthorized objects on visible property, and a violation of Section 14B regarding mobility equipment in shared visual zones. The phrasing made it sound polite, but it wasn't. It was a warning. Not signed, but at the bottom, in fine print, the initials of the Homeowners Association stood alone like a quiet threat. He didn't tell Sophie about it right away. He tucked it into the drawer where bills and tax papers went to wait their turn. He knew she would feel the sting even if she pretended otherwise. That chair was more than wood and wheels. It was part of her freedom, her face turned to the wind each morning, her silent way of pushing back against everything the world thought she couldn't be. But Sophie noticed. She always did. When he didn't push her all the way to the sidewalk that morning, stopping short near the porch steps, she looked up at him and didn't smile. Her eyes searched his like they were waiting for a reason. He told her someone had made a complaint, said maybe it was a misunderstanding. She didn't respond. Just looked out toward the end of the street, where the beige house with its perfect hedges and trimmed flags sat quiet and still. The woman wasn't outside, but the blinds had shifted an inch since yesterday. That afternoon, a neighbor passed by, slowing near the porch. An older man who lived around the corner always wore the same fishing hat no matter the weather. He didn't wave like usual. Just said, in a voice barely louder than the wind, "She's been looking for a reason. Don't give her one." Then he kept walking, head low, hands in his pockets. Sophie didn't ask who she was. She already knew. The first time the woman walked up the drive, Sophie was alone. Her father had stepped inside to answer a call, one of those check-ins from work that always sounded more like orders than conversation. Sophie was sitting in her usual spot by the dandelions, brush in one hand, paper balanced across her lap. The sun was warm but not heavy yet. A good morning, until it wasn't. The sound of shoes on gravel came first, sharp and steady. Sophie glanced up, expecting a neighbor or maybe a delivery. Instead, she saw beige slacks and a tucked blouse marching toward her, like they had somewhere more important to be. The woman didn't smile. Her mouth was pressed into a line so thin, it barely looked human. "You need to be inside," she said. No greeting, no question in her tone. "This is not an approved use of the common area." Sophie blinked. She hadn't moved from their own driveway. The same patch of concrete she'd sat on for weeks, where the breeze reached just right and the morning felt a little kinder. She glanced toward the porch, hoping her father had heard, but the door stayed closed. "I'm just painting," she said. Her voice was calm but soft, the way it always was when she felt cornered. The woman folded her arms. "It's not about the painting. This chair is an eyesore. It's not standard. It reflects poorly on the property values." Sophie looked down at her chair. The leather was clean, the wood polished. It didn't look like a hospital, didn't smell like antiseptic. It looked like her. She didn't say anything else. There didn't seem to be a point. The woman stepped closer. "You're old enough to understand rules. If your father won't teach you, someone needs to." That was when the door opened. Her father stepped out, phone still in his hand. His eyes found the woman first, then Sophie. The shift in his posture was slight but immediate. He didn't raise his voice, didn't need to. "She's on our property," he said. "You don't speak to her like that, ever." The woman turned to him with a practiced smile, the kind used in courtrooms and neighborhood meetings. "We're just having a conversation." "No," he said, walking down the steps slowly. "You're making a mistake." She held her ground, but something in her eyes flickered. Sophie didn't know what her father had said on the phone before, but now she saw something in him she hadn't seen in a while. Not just a parent. Something more. The woman left with her head high, but her walk quickened on the way back. Sophie waited until she disappeared behind her door, then looked at her father. He didn't speak, just sat beside her and picked up a brush. The invitation came 3 days later, printed on thick stock with the HOA seal embossed in pale blue. They called it a Community Standards Review, but the real meaning settled heavy in his chest as soon as he read the date. He didn't tell Sophie until the morning of, not because he wanted to hide it, but because she already carried more than her share. She watched him from across the kitchen as he slipped the paper back into its envelope, her spoon resting still in a bowl of untouched cereal. "Are you going to go?" she asked, voice quiet. "I have to," he said. "They're not going to stop if I don't look them in the eye." The clubhouse was 2 blocks away, tucked beside the tennis courts and framed by planters that matched every other house on the street. Inside, the cold hum of air conditioning met him first, followed by the dry rustle of folding chairs and the smell of printed agendas. Karen sat at the far end of the table, flanked by 2 men who rarely made eye contact, and nodded when she spoke. Her smile was polished, but her eyes were hard. "We've received several concerns," she began, her voice calm and practiced, "about property compliance and safety visibility. The custom mobility device appears to be in conflict with neighborhood guidelines for external modifications." He didn't answer right away. Let the silence stretch. Let them sit in it. "It's a wheelchair," he said. "Built for my daughter, on my property." Karen folded her hands like a preacher preparing a sermon. "That may be so, but it doesn't match the community's aesthetic expectations. It could create a precedent. Exceptions, once allowed, can be difficult to control." A man beside her cleared his throat. "We've brought sample brochures for standard models that would be more suitable." He didn't look at the brochures, didn't touch them. "I'm not here to get permission," he said. "I came so you'd say it to my face, that you think a child's mobility is a disruption to your lawn." Karen's smile slipped for just a moment, but she recovered quickly. "We'll be documenting this formally." He nodded once. Then he stood. He left the papers behind on the table, their glossy pages fanned out like they meant something. After the meeting, the street went quiet again. Not the peace of things made right, but the hush of something waiting. Sophie still came out each morning, though now her father stayed closer, always with a hand on the porch rail or a foot resting near the first step. She didn't ask about the meeting. He didn't bring it up. But something between them had shifted. She painted less and watched more. The woman at the end of the cul-de-sac didn't appear for a few days. Her blinds stayed drawn. No letters came. No clipped warnings or stiff smiles. Just silence, long and brittle like glass. A few neighbors began to wave again. A couple even stopped to say hello. Nothing deep. Nothing lasting. One of them, a young mother with a toddler in tow, brought over a basket of bread, said it was extra from a school fundraiser. She didn't stay long, didn't mention the chair or the meeting, just smiled, awkward and brief. Sophie spent most afternoons tracing new shapes into her sketchbook. She still loved the dandelions but had started to draw people too, always small in the corner, never facing the viewer. Once, he asked who they were. She said she didn't know yet, that maybe they were watching someone else. At night, her father sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a folder of papers spread beside him. Legal forms, local ordinances, civil rights cases buried deep in public records. He read slowly, taking notes in the margins. Sometimes he stared out the window as if expecting headlights, though the street was always empty after 10. One evening, Sophie asked if he thought it was over. He hesitated, then said, "Not yet." There was no reason to think trouble would come again, but he trusted the feeling in his chest. It was the same one he'd learned to listen to in cities and courtrooms and parking lots where men wore uniforms but not honor. The wheelchair sat by the porch door each morning, just as it had before. The same hawk carved in the side, the same careful stain across the grain. A mark of love, not approval. It wasn't a violation. It was a home. But he kept a camera near the window now, just in case silence became something else. It was a Thursday when it happened. Late morning, sky cloudless and cruel, the kind of day that felt calm right up until it wasn't. Her father had gone to the hardware store, just a quick run for stain and brushes. He left Sophie on the porch with her sketch pad and the usual breeze lifting her hair. She told him she'd be fine. He believed her. It was their street, their driveway, their home. She didn't hear the woman coming. The sound of the rolling trash bins masked the footsteps, and by the time Sophie looked up, Karen was already standing at the edge of the porch. Her blouse was pressed and pale blue, the kind of color that tries to look friendly but never quite does. Her mouth was tight. In one hand she held something that looked like a short rope. In the other, a clipboard with no paper on it. Sophie's hand tightened on her pencil. "I'm not bothering anyone." "You were told," Karen said, voice clipped and shaking at the edges. "This setup violates neighborhood aesthetics. It reflects poorly on shared property values. Your continued defiance is unacceptable. I'm on my own driveway." Karen stepped forward, slow and certain, as if she had rehearsed this moment in her mirror. "This isn't about driveways. It's about respect. You've chosen not to listen." The rope wasn't rope at all. It was a dog leash. Short, thick, the kind made for pulling. Before Sophie could roll back, Karen reached forward and looped it around the armrest of her chair. The metal hook snapped into place. Sophie shouted, pulling away. But the brake had slipped, and her wheels turned too fast. Karen grabbed the back of the chair and twisted it toward the porch column. Then she reached again, this time with the leash wrapped around Sophie's wrist, tying it tight with fingers that moved too fast for trembling. "You're not going anywhere," she said. "You can sit here until your father learns what real consequences feel like." Then the hand came down. It wasn't a slap meant to sting. It was flat and hard across Sophie's face. Her body jerked back, breath catching in her throat. Another came, this time to her shoulder. She screamed, not from the pain but from the shock of it. A neighbor across the street opened their blinds, then quickly closed them. But someone else had seen. A teenage boy standing behind the corner hedge, holding his phone low and shaking. He wasn't brave enough to yell, but he was recording. Every second. Karen raised her hand again. Sophie flinched. And that's when the sound of tires touched the pavement behind them. Gravel shifted. A door slammed shut. Sophie didn't see him at first, but she felt the way the air changed, heavy and full. Her father had come home. He didn't run. That was the part Sophie remembered most later. He didn't shout or flail or demand answers. He just walked. From the moment the truck door closed to the moment he stepped into the yard, it was like watching a fuse burn down, slow, straight, and certain. Karen froze where she stood, her hand still half raised. The leash trembled in her fingers. She turned her head, expecting someone ordinary, someone she could outtalk or overrule. What she saw instead stopped her breath for a moment. He wore plain clothes, work jeans, an old shirt with a name stitched into the chest from a job long left behind. But his eyes weren't tired. Not anymore. They were sharp, clear, and fixed on her like she was already a memory. Sophie couldn't speak. The pain in her shoulder pulsed, but it was the shock that held her still. The leash was still looped tight. Her father saw it. His steps didn't change. He came to a full stop 3 feet from Karen. No words at first. Just the silence of a man who had seen things far worse and would not flinch for something so small as this. Karen tried to find her voice. She was being disrespectful, she said. I had no choice. He didn't answer. He reached forward and unlatched the leash with one clean motion. The metal clinked softly as it dropped to the ground. Sophie felt her hand come free, and with it, something in her chest broke loose too. You put your hands on my daughter, he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. You tied her like an animal, and you struck her. Karen took a step back. I was enforcing rules. He reached into his back pocket and pulled something out. A wallet. From it he drew a badge, silver and marked. She blinked at it, confused at first, then stunned. I'm not just her father, he said. I'm a federal agent, and you just assaulted a disabled minor. Karen opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Sophie sat in silence, the pain dull now under the weight of something bigger. The leash lay between them like a line that had finally been crossed. Her father stood between her and the woman, eyes steady, waiting for sirens. Karen stepped back like she'd been shoved, though no one had touched her. Her eyes darted from the badge to his face, then back again, searching for some loophole, some excuse that might still protect her. But the street had gone quiet, and there was no rescue coming from behind a hedge or a closed blind. The badge glinted in the sun, simple and cold. Not the kind carried by local officers who answered to the neighborhood board, but the kind that got respect in every state. It didn't matter that he wasn't wearing a uniform. The weight behind it was clear. He tucked it away slowly, then turned toward Sophie. She was still holding the armrest of her chair, her fingers pale where they had gripped tight. He knelt beside her, checked her wrist, the mark from the leash already red and rising. Her cheek bore a light swelling. She tried to smile, but it faltered. I'm okay, she whispered. He didn't answer, just nodded once. He brushed a lock of hair from her face and stood again, turning to Karen. You're going to stay right there, he said. Police are already on their way. I didn't know, Karen stammered. She looked fine, she was rude. You don't understand what it's like trying to keep order here. Order? His voice stayed even, but something deep in it shifted. You call this order? You tied a child to a chair and hit her. That's not rules, that's rage. Karen looked at the houses around them, suddenly aware of how visible she was. Curtains shifted. A phone camera still peeked from behind the hedge. The boy who had filmed hadn't moved. She stepped back again. She was alone. I didn't think anyone would. You didn't think. That's the only true thing you've said. A siren wailed in the distance, drawing closer. Karen's eyes went wide. He turned back to Sophie, rested a hand lightly on her shoulder. You're safe now. The patrol car rolled into view. Red and blue danced across the white siding of the cul-de-sac homes. For the first time, Karen looked afraid in a way that wasn't performance. She took a step as if to leave, but his hand came up, palm open. Don't, he said. If you run, you'll only make it worse. And so she stood there, with her arms stiff at her sides and her mouth trembling, as justice came pulling up the curb in plain sight of everyone. The police stepped out of the cruiser with quiet purpose, hands resting on belts, not yet drawn but ready. 2 officers, one older with grey in his temples, the other younger and wide-eyed. They scanned the scene quickly, the girl in the chair, bruised and red, the father standing firm beside her, the woman in blue, stiff and sweating, arms crossed too tight. Sophie sat quietly, her eyes wide but dry. Her father didn't move, didn't speak unless they asked. He let the badge do the explaining first, then gave a clear account. His voice was calm, each word landing with precision. The leash still lay coiled on the porch like a dead snake, and Sophie's wrist bore the mark to match. Karen tried at first, Said the girl had provoked her, said it was a misunderstanding, said she'd only meant to secure the chair for safety. She spun words like thread, but they kept unraveling. The teenage boy stepped forward without being asked. His hands shook as he offered the phone, but the video was steady. No sound at first, then Sophie's voice, then the slap, her scream. The officers didn't argue with her. They didn't scold. They just nodded, and the younger one reached gently for Karen's wrist. She pulled away at first, but only for a second. The cuffs clicked quiet and fast. She looked more shocked than scared, like she couldn't believe the world had actually turned on her. The officer read her rights. Her neighbors watched from behind curtains, a few now fully open. No one came out. No one spoke up. No one moved to help her. Sophie's father watched the whole thing with arms crossed and a face like stone. When the cruiser pulled away, he didn't look proud or angry, just tired, as if some weight had shifted, but not entirely lifted. The porch felt bigger with her gone, the driveway warmer. He knelt beside Sophie and looked her in the eye. "You sure you're all right?" She nodded, then leaned forward and rested her head against his chest. He wrapped his arms around her gently, careful of her shoulder, and held her until the quiet felt safe again. For the first time in days, the air smelled like cut grass instead of fear. The day after the arrest, the street felt different, softer, quieter in a way that wasn't just about silence. People came out slowly, not all at once. Some stood at the ends of their driveways pretending to water plants. Others swept porches that didn't need sweeping. But their eyes kept drifting toward the house with the ramp and the girl who painted by the sidewalk. Sophie sat outside again, her bruises fading to yellow along the edge. Her father sat beside her, a hand resting on the wooden arm of her chair. They weren't waiting for anything, just sitting like always. A man from across the street walked over first. He brought a paper plate covered in foil and didn't say much beyond a quiet apology. He stayed only a moment. Then a younger couple came. Then an older woman with a trembling voice. No one said they had seen what happened, but they didn't deny it either. One woman, maybe late 30s, knelt beside Sophie and touched her hand carefully. "I saw her yelling at you last month," she said. "I didn't say anything. I thought it would just pass." Sophie looked at her, not with anger but something softer. It didn't. The woman nodded and looked down. "I'm sorry." Her father watched them all, listened without offering much back. He wasn't rude. He just knew this wasn't his moment to speak. They had stayed quiet long enough. Now it was their turn to carry the weight of it. The neighbors came and went, some leaving food, others just standing nearby in silence. By late afternoon, the breeze had picked up again, rustling the edge of Sophie's sketchbook. She looked out at the street, the quiet homes, the empty sidewalks, and finally said, "It's better now." Her father nodded. For now. The lawyer came from the city, sharp suit, soft voice, and eyes that never missed a detail. He sat at the kitchen table with Sophie's father and listened more than he talked. When he did speak, it was careful and clear, the kind of man who carried the weight of justice in paperwork and time, not noise. The case moved fast. The video had gone viral by then, picked up by a local station and shared across news sites. People saw what had happened. They saw the leash, they saw the slap. They saw the girl's face and the man standing between her and the one who hurt her. The lawsuit named the HOA, Karen by full name, and several board members who had approved the written complaints. Civil rights violations, negligence, emotional trauma, and targeted harassment. It sounded clinical in writing, but Sophie's father knew what it really meant. A line had been crossed, and now it would be traced back, inch by inch, until someone paid for what had been allowed. The board dissolved within a month. Karen lost her seat first, then her house. The court placed her on probation and ordered counseling. It wasn't jail, but it was something. Sophie started therapy soon after, not just for the bruises, but for the nights she still woke with her hand clenched around the memory of that leash. Her father went back to work. On weekends, he started building again. Not a porch this time, not a ramp, but a new chair. Bigger wheels, thicker frame, meant for trails, not sidewalks. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked him one morning. He smiled and ran a hand along the edge of the oak. "Wherever you want." And for the first time, that felt true. The park was quiet that morning, dew still clinging to the grass, Sky stretched wide and pale above the trees. Sophie rolled forward on the new chair, the tires thick and smooth, built to handle gravel and dips without pause. Her hands moved steady against the rims, practiced and calm. Her father walked a few steps behind, a thermos in one hand and a worn flannel draped over his shoulder. Children's voices echoed from the far end near the swings. A golden retriever chased leaves near the benches. No one stared. A few people nodded, some waved. The air smelled of pine and wet earth. Sophie paused near the edge of a trail and looked out across the small lake beyond the reeds. She didn't speak, but her father understood. He stepped beside her, rested his hand on her shoulder for just a moment, then stepped back again. She rolled forward, the wheels lifting gently over the packed dirt, turning with the rhythm of someone who knew where she was going, even if she hadn't been there before. A little boy passed them, walking with his mother. He glanced up at Sophie and smiled without asking why she was in a chair. She smiled back, just as easy. The wind picked up, soft through the trees, and her father watched her disappear slowly into the woods, not behind or beneath anyone now, just moving forward, free.